Gestalt principles and depth perception. One Gestalt principle is called figure versus ground. This principle says that when there are two objects, one object is the figure or the focus, and the other is the ground or the backdrop. This principle not only applies to sight but also to hearing. In this example, the guitar could be the figure and the blue wall could be the ground, or the blue wall could be the figure and everything else would be the ground. When talking about perception, figure versus ground helps us focus on one object at a time and allows us to experience depth. Another Gestalt principle is called proximity. This principle says that distance or spacing impacts our perception. This principle can help us clearly see things that are set apart. In this example, the cupcakes placed in the container make it easier to see columns instead of rows because of how they are spaced. Additionally, if one cupcake from each column were pushed together, it would be easy to see that they are spaced differently from the others. Proximity affects our perception because it allows us to see order in different objects, and when it is altered, it allows us to easily see when objects are out of place. Another Gestalt principle is called similarity. This principle states that we take similar things and group them based on similar characteristics, for example, based on color. This principle allows us to pick out differences easily. In this example, we see a towel with 3 different colored dots, white, pink, and green. Because of this principle, we group them with other colored dots because they are similar in color. If there was a single black dot in the middle of the other dots, it would be easier to pick out because there are no other dots of the same color. Similarity affects our perception by allowing us to group things based on characteristics and by allowing us to pick out differences. This Gestalt principle is called continuity. This principle states that we are constantly looking to create continuous patterns in our brain and for things to flow. In this example, the words Quinnipiac University repeat and create a continuous diagonal line pattern. If these words were randomly placed, no pattern would be able to be made. This principle affects our perception because it allows us to see and form patterns in our everyday lives. This Gestalt principle is called connectedness. This principle states that we tend to group things together when they are physically connected. In this example, there are car keys connected to a keychain or lanyard. According to this principle, we group the car keys and the lanyard together because they are physically connected. This principle influences our perception because it allows us to create relationships and group things based on physical connection. Without this principle, we would not be able to relate objects together even though they would be connected. This Gestalt principle is called closure. This principle states that the brain is able to fill in missing information to create a whole image, sound, etc. In this example, there's a bumper sticker for a band with a dog on it. Although it is not filled in, the dog looks like a dog because the brain fills in the missing parts, like the top of the dog's head, for example. This principle influences our perception by filling in and glossing over missing parts of an image, allowing us to see the image as a whole. Without this principle, for example, we may not be able to see the image of a dog in the bumper sticker, instead just various shapes that do not have any meaning to us. This depth cue is called linear perspective. This perspective shows us that as straight lines get farther away, the lines appear to be closer together. When the lines are far apart, it means they are closer to us. When the lines are close together, it means that they are farther away from us. In this picture, it shows a road. The lines appear far apart because they are closest to the camera and come together in the distance of the photo. This depth cue is important when talking about perception because it allows us to see how distance affects our understanding of depth. Without this depth cue, it would be impossible to perceive this image as having distance and depth, and would just seem like a flat image of a narrowing road. This depth cue is called interposition. This depth cue shows how close or far an object is based on how it is stacked in our retinal field. The object obscuring part of another object is the closest, and the object being blocked is farther away. The brain layers these objects and comes up with depth. In this example, it shows 2 magnets and a paper clip blocking several pieces of paper. Because of this depth cue, we can tell that the clips and flower magnet are closer to us because they obstruct parts of the paper. This depth cue allows us to perceive depth and allows us to understand which objects are closer to us. Without this depth cue, we would not understand if the magnets or paper were closer to us. Another depth cue is called relative height. This depth cue tells us that the further away an object is, the taller and smaller it is. The closer the object is, the shorter and bigger it will be. In this example, it shows 2 different sets of trees. The closer tree appears to be bigger but shorter in height, while the tree in the back appears smaller but taller. This influences perception because it allows us to understand the relationship between height and depth. Another depth cue is called relative size. This depth cue tells us that the space an object takes up on the retinal field depends on the distance from the object. If an object takes up a small space, then it is further away. If it takes up a larger space, then it is closer to you. In this example, the soap takes up a larger space, so it is closer. The toothpaste and toothbrush take up less space, so the object is further away. This influences perception because it allows us to understand the relationship between size and depth. This idea of shape constancy tells us that even under certain conditions like lighting, distance, and angles, shapes of objects will remain constant. In this example, a chair is shown from 4 different angles. Despite the angle, we can still tell that it is a chair. The shape of the chair is always constant, even from these different angles. This influences our perception because it allows us to identify objects regardless of the condition. Because of shape constancy, we are able to identify different objects from different conditions like this chair. Size constancy tells us that objects remain the same size despite what they look like in the distance. For example, if someone is walking towards you, you know they are not growing because of size constancy. In this example, you can see how one coffee creamer looks smaller when it is behind the other, but when comparing them side by side, the size is constant. Size constancy affects our perception because it allows us to understand that objects don't magically grow or shrink when an object comes closer or goes far away. This idea of brightness-color constancy tells us that color or brightness of an object does not change and stays constant despite any condition, like turning the lights on and off. In this example, the same flag is shown. In the top picture, the lights are off, and in the bottom picture, the lights are on. From this image, you can see that the flag and even the wall color do not change dramatically. Brightness-color constancy influences and affects our perception because it allows us to see color without it changing in different conditions.